Hello and welcome. My name is Amy Gray. I'm the Media and Publications Project Coordinator here in LCMS Youth Ministry, and we're so excited for you to join us for this month's LCMS Youth Webinar. We have Dan Kreienkamp here with us this month. Dan is a trained Director of Christian Education who is currently serving as a teacher and spiritual life coordinator at Lutheran High School St. Charles in St. Charles, Missouri. He spoke on this topic of dealing with stress at the last LCMS Youth Gathering last summer and was able to speak with youth about this topic, and we're so excited to have him here to be able to talk now with youth workers, parents, those who deal with youth around a similar theme of how we care for youth as they undergo so much stress and deal with the different things in their lives. You'll see Dan's contact information here. If you have follow-up questions or want to connect with him following this presentation, please feel free to reach out to Dan for that. Just a couple of things about today's webinar. You will see a chat box on the left-hand side of your screen. That's a place where you can ask questions or leave comments, and then Dan and I will either answer them. If it's something that I can just provide a quick response to throughout the webinar, I will do that. Otherwise, there'll be a time for Q&A towards the end where Dan can expound upon your question further. And I think with that, we are ready to start. I'm going to open us up in prayer, and then Dan will take it away. If you would join me in prayer. Heavenly Father, our youth are stressed out. With so many things on their plate and decisions to be made, it can be easy to lose sight of you and the peace that you give. Please guide all of us, youth and adults, in your peace, the peace that passes all understanding, peace that the world cannot give. Show our youth your love through Jesus. Enable us as adults who care for youth the ability to point them to you. I thank you for Dan. I thank you for the ways in which he works with youth and serves those around him. I pray that you would please strengthen and bless him now as he leads our time together. In your name, Jesus, amen.
All right, thank you, Amy. So it is most definitely a privilege to be speaking to you today. And just kind of, following up with this topic came to me actually in 2013 on that youth gathering as well. I spoke on the topic and then got to redo it at 2016. And the amazing thing about that, which is kind of reflective of our culture now, is that I didn't think anybody would, come to my session. I'm a nobody, and I don't think anybody came to my sessions because of who I am, but because of the ability to have a conversation about stress. And so, I think that speaks to how important this topic is, and being able to discuss this topic with youth and help with interventions and help students have conversations. And again, because of our culture right now, which is a really good thing, we're able to have a conversation. I don't have a lot of research and numbers and facts and things to back it up, but I don't think, at least when I was in school, you didn't talk about how stressed out you were. At least it wasn't so prevalent. You wanted to be cool and relaxed, and it just wasn't something I don't think we talked about a lot. But students today have a desire to talk about their stress and their anxieties and their fears, and so being able to have a conversation is the first step to dealing with it. And so we're really blessed that we're in a time now where we can have these conversations. And so as we get into this, I'm going to talk. This will be a little bit psychoeducational. We'll talk about what stress is, talk about how some people experience, how to deal with it, and I'll kind of throw little tidbits in here and there. And it's a modified version of what I talked about in 2016, but again geared towards you guys and helping students out. So the first thing we do is of course define and what is stress. And stress is simply a response to a demand. And when you look at it that way, stress isn't necessarily bad. It's just something that we have to do. And so you ask a question: what if there was no stress in the world? Then we would have a difficult time getting things done, because stress involves deadlines. It involves, the things that keep us productive, keeps us doing things, the responsibilities that we have. And if we don't have those responsibilities, if we don't have anything to push us forward to, then we may not get a whole lot done. If you really want to get Lutheran in this, you can kind of look at, stress in the same way we look at the law. We need the law to correct us, to guide us, to show us how to live. And we also need the law to work with the gospel so that we know we are saved and forgiven. If our focus is only on the law and we don't experience that forgiveness, that's a really difficult life we live. That's a stressful life that we live. And so in the same way, if we're only focused on our stress, that's tough. We don't want to be only focused on the law. We don't want to be only focused on the things that stress us out. So what is stress like? We defined it as a response, but then that's not necessarily how we talk about it. We talk about it in terms of I feel stressed. I'm feeling, stressed out. And so that feeling, those feelings, those are, let me get my notes here. Those feelings are our responses based on emotion. And so that stress feeling, when we are experience all those, I like to think of stress as a storm. And so, everything crashing down on you. You've got the waves that are, rocking your boat. You've got the wind. You've got the ominous skies, all the stuff around you, all the stresses. And then all together, you respond, and you respond emotionally. And so you're worried, you're experiencing anxiety, and that's how we usually feel this stress, or that's the emotion involved, and also the anger that happens as a result of being too stressed out. Because you have to let it go. If you don't deal with your stress, if you don't, if you just kind of push it down, keep it to yourself, and then at some point, it might all come out at once. And I don't have the video clip to show, but I love this. The nicest man in the world, Ned Flanders. This is great talking to youth professionals because you guys know who the Simpsons are, I hope. Kids don't really know much about the Simpsons anymore, but the nicest man, the nicest church-going guy in the world, Ned Flanders, he blows up because he's held all of his stress and all of his anxieties and all of his anger in, and he lets it go on the town and just tells everybody off. And while it felt great at the time, it feels great to tell somebody off, it led to broken relationships. It led to more problems. And so we need to find healthy ways to deal with stress. And so that's kind of what we're going to talk about here. There's a great example of somebody who is really stressed out in the Bible, and that's Moses. Of course, he's the leader of the Israelites, and if you're leading a whole bunch of whining, complaining people, of course, you're going to have a lot of stress. And so in Numbers 20, we find that the people are in need. They need water, they're in the desert, they're arguing amongst themselves, and so Moses has to fix the problem. This is a stress to him. He's probably irritated, confused, doesn't know what to do. And so he starts off in a pretty good way. He goes to God and gets a solution. And he says, I want you to go and speak to a rock, and it'll burst forth water. Now, we don't know why, but Moses goes to the rock, and instead of speaking to it, he disobeys, and he hits the rock. Now, I got to believe that was a frustration move. I don't think it was a direct disobedience to God. It was, I've done this before, and, he didn't just tap the rock. I think he just let it happen, just whacked the rock with his staff. The water came out, but that also led to a problem. So he dealt with his stress. He let his stress go by hitting the rock. The problem was the way he dealt with it caused more stress. He was not allowed back into the promised land as a result of his disobedience. So if the way that you deal with stress causes more stress, then it's unhealthy. And it's time to find a better way to deal with it. So we're going to pivot here. I'm going to talk about ways to deal with stress or some different thoughts as we get into the different kinds of stress. And so first off, we ask the question, what do you stress about? And I think that's different for everybody, but there's some common things that we all stress about, but they're actually even more in common than you might think. Because when we tend to ask, what are you stressed about? Work, school, family, those kinds of things are listed as the stressors, which is true, but there's a lot of different aspects to what's going on. And so I asked my students on Monday during our morning devotion, this is only half of the student body, but I said, stand up if you are stressed about school. And so as you can kind of see there, there's a good 3/4, maybe even more, of the student body that are standing up because they are stressed out about school. And so that tells us that this is something that kids really want to deal with. They want to help solve it. They're experiencing it, and they're willing to admit that they are stressed out about school. So how do we intervene? How do we help them to deal with it? And that's the first thing, is to understand that it's not necessarily school that they are stressed out about. Because you can't just, well, number one, you can't just take school away. Then I wouldn't have a job. But you just can't take it away. So we have to understand how they're experiencing this stress and what happens when it builds. And so as we try to figure out what's going on, I'm reminded of James 1 here, for us to be quick to listen and slow to speak. And so, yes, the student might be stressed out about school, and that may be the first thing that they say. But it's our job to find more. You want to find out more about it. Because what your perspective of what school stress looks like might be completely different from their context and what they're experiencing. And so I wouldn't even describe school as a stressor necessarily, because there's a whole bunch of different ways. There's 4 that I'm going to talk about today. And all 4 of these stress, the ways we experience stress, can have to do with school. And they can have to do with work, and they can have to do with family, and they can have to do with just about anything that brings us stress. And so being able to sit down and have a conversation and try to understand, can you tell me more? Tell me more about what you're experiencing. Tell me more about what you're going through. Is how we start to deal with it. So I'm going to show you a few pictures. These are similar pictures to ones I show the youth, but they show great examples of this. So what does this little guy have to stress out about? I mean, he's making fish faces. He's got wild hair. He's sitting there at Five Guys ready to eat. So not a care in the world. Why is this guy stressed out? And the reality is he's not stressed out. He's not the one who's experiencing the stress. He is a burden. Now, he is my son. He's almost 2, and he is a joyous burden, and I love him with all my heart. But we do have burdens that we deal with, and our burdens can cause stress. And so, I have responsibilities when it comes to my child. I have to make sure that he's fed, make sure that he's changed, in bed on time, not acting too crabby for his babysitter, dropping him off, getting him updated on vaccines. Everything that you have to do as a parent is a burden, and it can be very, very stressful. And so instead of focusing on just parenting as the stress, it is the burdens that we have. And so how do we consider what burdens that we have? And I wanted to relate this to students, so to give you a little perspective of what students might be experiencing. How can I get all this work done and play soccer, the violin, be in bands, and do all these other activities, student council? How can I get all of this work done? And that causes stress. I've been helping my friend out with class. How can I focus on my own grades? I've got a job, I've got sports, I've got music, it's too much. and I have to take care of my family too. I have responsibilities. I have to pick my little brother up. I have to have a job, maybe even have to help pay the rent. These are all burdens that students might be dealing with. And so while the stressor is school, you can see there's other things that go into it. And so how do we deal with our burdens? What's the way? And so I've got two more examples from Moses here. The first example is from Exodus 17. And in the story, Moses is stressed out. He's being attacked. He's the leader of the Israelites. He's responsible for them. And he needs to hold his hands up in the air because God had said that if your hands are held high in the air, both hands, that Israel would be winning the battle. And if they drop down, they'd be losing. Now, if you want to really think about how stressful this is, I mean, if your hands in the air winning, hands down losing, well, how do you lose a battle? People die. So you've got people's lives literally in your hands. If you lower them, they start dying, alive, dead, alive. That's stressful. Okay. And so it leads him to be physically exhausted because of his hands. He's probably worried, upset. What's going to happen? And his solution was a great one. That he had his closest companions literally hold up his arms and help him out. And I got to believe that he didn't just stand there looking for help, that he asked for help and that he was having conversations and talking with people. And so as we deal with our burdens, to be able to ask for help, to be able to talk about, are there resources I have? Are there people that I can lean on literally to help with some of these burdens? And so that's one perspective. Another one is from the very next chapter. Is Moses was, as the leader of the Israelites, the person who solved all of their problems. If there was a civil dispute, they brought it to Moses. Now, when you have this huge nation of people, your day quickly gets spent, dealing with these small problems. It's kind of like, it'd be like if you have a huge congregation and every single person came to the senior pastor to solve their problems. And we all know it's the DC that solves the problems anyway. So this is weird because I can't get feedback. I'm hoping you're laughing now. That was a joke. But so in any case, Moses is dealing with everybody's problems, leaves them overloaded, overwhelmed. He's got his own issues he's got to deal with too. And he's solving other people's problems. And so he saw it as his burden to bear. And in dealing with his stress and just having conversation, he got some advice from a person he respected, and that's Jethro, his father-in-law. And his father-in-law kind of asked the question, do you need to handle every single one of these disputes? And, I can't imagine the exact conversation going on, but he's probably thinking, well, probably not. Don't you think there's somebody else that could help handle as well? Well, yeah. They end up appointing elders, and that spread the work out, and all of a sudden his burden was lifted from him. And that comes from, again, some creative problem solving and talking with somebody that you trust. And so as we get even more into this, I think you guys are in a Jethro kind of a role, that you can be someone that gives perspective to students. I think that's in dealing with stress. I'm not going to give you a 1, 2, 3 steps necessarily. But again, if the first step is talking about it and getting it out there, as you receive that, then you can be a sounding board and to help them to decipher what kind of problems they may need to solve. Although not every problem is solvable. So this is one here, popular TV show, Teen Mom OG. I'm not even going to go there. But what they are stressing about is circumstances. And so now some of these circumstances that they're dealing with, of course, are things that they can't change. They chose to have a child. and in some cases are married, aren't married, and the result means that they have to put all their resources into their child. They don't have as many resources because they don't have an education because they got pregnant when they were in high school. And so these are the circumstances they're dealing with, and they can't change those. It happened, and so they have to deal with them, but that doesn't mean that they don't stress them out. There's also circumstances, in addition to those, that students deal with. These are just small, simple ones, but these are some ones that my Lutheran high school students experience that they can't control in most cases. I can't get to school on time because I don't have a car to rely on somebody else. I'm stuck at school for hours because my parents' work schedule. So I can't get anything done. I can't be social. I can't even afford to go out to eat, much less pay a tutor. Okay, so we have circumstances in which we are sometimes stuck in, and so those can be stressful. How do we deal with those? Especially the ones that we can't change. And so, again, I think one, your role as somebody who listens and tries to understand, and simply just having somebody listen and listen to your stresses and get them out, is something that can be helpful. It's not just building up and bottling up and going to explode later on. So I think that's one good takeaway. The other thing I would say with these circumstances is, as we give them perspective, we keep Philippians 4:13 in mind. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And I really want to focus on the I've learned to be content part of this scripture, because this is one of the most misunderstood scriptures in the Bible, and that, I can do all things is something that's written on eye black in football and written on our shoes, and is something that, sometimes is seen as a banner for I can be in the NBA, if I just trust in God and He will give me the strength. And that's really not what it's about. It's Paul talking about the difficult circumstances that he's lived through, and that, I've been poor and I've been in want. I haven't known where my next meal is going to come from. But Christ is still my rock. He's the one that helps me to get through it. I've also had times where I've been rich, and I have had, and again, it's still Christ who gives me that strength, who is my rock. And so that's something to continually remind them of. And then if there's things that you can't change, if you can't change your circumstances, then you can change how you react to them and how you prepare for them. And so in a couple other ways, and I didn't include these written in my presentation, but talking about physical exercise as a stress relief, and as a way to, you're focused on the circumstances, you can't change them, but you keep on thinking about them. Break the cycle by doing something that doesn't cause you stress, by doing something physical, or even having a conversation. Again, this just goes back to the main principle. If what you use to deal with stress causes more stress, it's not healthy. So finding a way physically that is a way that you can deal with that stress. Breathing exercises, things like that. Again, the things that you can't control, you can only control what you do. And also, if the circumstances are a great issue, it's also something that you can be proactive about. It doesn't have to be when I get really upset, I go exercise. Building in regular exercise, building in regular conversation time with somebody who you can trust. Building in regular time to whatever it is that relieves stress, crochet or, whatever it is. As long as it doesn't cause more stress, then that can be a stress reliever. What about your future? College ahead? I don't know. We get worried about our future, and that's definitely something that's on the minds of our students. And again, this is related to school as well. just on the simple immediate future. Will I have to retake this class? What's going to happen to me if I don't get an A? I feel like I can barely survive high school. How can I go to college? Senior year is coming up, and I have no idea what college that I'm going to go to. And so we get focused on the future, and that can bring us a lot of stress. Now Moses had a concern about his future in Exodus 32. And the future was that there was none, because God was going to destroy the stiff-necked Israelites. And as their leader, as somebody who cares for them, that left him frightened and lonely and worried about what was going to happen to them. And so as he ponders the future, and you could even look at this as circumstances as well that he couldn't change, he has a great solution. He seeks God's presence, and he asks for forgiveness. And in that, he didn't have to worry about his future anymore. He placed it all in God's hands. And I'm also reminded of Jeremiah 29:11, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope." Now, again, this is another verse that can be misinterpreted as that there's a specific mapped out plan for your life. Make no mistake, Jeremiah was a person whose life was pretty awful. He was I've referred to him, a friend referred to him as the mopey prophet, because he had problems with his friends, problems with his leaders. He was jailed. He was in trouble a lot, and he was delivering a message of trouble. And so in this, there's hope, but there's also a realization that there's real struggle going on. There's real struggle happening. And so we don't want to just, say, oh, well, everything's going to be okay. God has a plan for you, but that we can understand what are their concerns for the future? What are you going through? And again, if there's some things that, you can change, you can work towards that and help problem solve. And if there's others that you can't do, then you rely on God. And I think it's also important to consider, is this something that you are worried about right now? Is this something that's immediate? Applying for college. If it's March and you're trying to go to college in August, yeah, you should be really worried. If it's the very beginning of your senior year and you're stressing out about, where you're going to go to college, then, you have that conversation. What have you done so far? Are you, do you have finalists? How are you working through that? And again, having that conversation and having that discussion about the future. And again, sometimes just talking about it and getting out is helpful. And I also encourage, in any of these, there's nothing wrong with, sitting down with a student and writing things out. It's a way to visualize the stress, and if you can see it and cross things off and check things off, that can actually be a very helpful way of dealing with stress as well. The last one, this is Adele, famous Grammy-winning singer. And she is quoted here saying, "I have anxiety attacks, constant panicking on stage. My heart feels like it's going to explode because I never feel like I'm going to deliver ever." And this has to do with expectations. And so, the interesting thing about this is we have different kinds of expectations. We have expectations. So if you went to see Adele in concert, you would have expectations. You would expect her to play certain songs. You would expect her to come out and do an encore, because that's what everybody does now at concerts. You would expect her to sing well with professionalism. And then you might hope that, it's a really great concert. Now Adele, in some ways experiences this anxiety because she wants your experience to be the best ever. She wants her concert to be something that you will remember forever. And that is an expectation that she puts on herself. And so as we look at these expectations, are these expectations that others have of us that are stressing us out, or are they expectations that we have of ourselves. And so we look at how a student might look at school and see expectations. My parents expect an A, an ACT score of this. They expect me to go to this college. I'm expected to be a leader at church, at school, in sports, at home. I have these expectations of me. I expect myself to get an A, to get an ACT score of whatever, to go to this college or university. And so, so as you look at these expectations, there's a simple, and this is one that's probably the most practical to talk about and deal with. Because you can ask the question of, with these expectations, how much do you control? And so you can break this down. Asking a question like, if you're worried about people liking you at school, everyone in school should like me and want to be liked. What kind of control do you have over that? Do you have no control? Do you have some control? Do you have complete control? Just the realization and writing it out and saying, oh, you know what? I can't completely control that. And this is, again, where this is an exercise that students can use, about control, or you can also work through them with it, verbally and say, okay, what can you really control in this? Studying for difficult tests. Do you have no control, some control, complete control? And again, this is where the stresses can combine, because, if this is your only stressor right now is your expectations, then you might have pretty much complete control, and it's just a matter of setting your own priorities. That's a different conversation than a student who, might be overcommitted, has responsibilities, or is going through crisis at the time, going through, crisis with the home, or, if a student has to work to help pay rent, if they have to have responsibilities with their younger brothers and sisters because their parents aren't able to, then they might not have complete control over studying for the test. And so then you can ask the question, then, is it realistic to expect, yourself to ace everything? If you can't even, if you can't control, whether or not when you can study, then you might be setting your expectations for yourself a little too high. And so this is a great tool for having a conversation with a student. And for those of you that are control freaks, out there, and I had to relinquish control, because right now my Old Testament class is taking a test, without me in there to answer questions and to solve any problems that are going on. So, there's a little bit of stress and anxiety. But as I look at that, I consider how much control, and am I willing to let go of it a little bit, and are there people that I can trust that are there? And so I have a sub that's in there, and I've got full confidence that everything is going just fine, even though they probably are really stressing out because they have a test. And then I think just a good, last one, my parents' reaction when I don't get a good grade. How often do we worry about something, when we know it's going to happen? And so, you get that bad grade, your parents are going to be upset. You can't control how they react, but you think about it every single second. And it causes more stress. And again, it builds on each other. And if you can't just let it go, then your other stresses combine, and it feels like you're caught in a storm. And so to take a second and say, okay, is there anything else that I could really do? No, there's nothing I can do. Or maybe there are, some things. Hey, I've talked to the teacher about working on extra credit, and you can help, be proactive in it. But try to understand, instead of just freaking out and worrying about what your parents' reaction is going to be, realize how maybe sometimes you have little control, and there's not much you can do about it. Matthew 6:25-27, therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air, they neither sow nor reap nor gather in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? Worrying really is a useless exercise, because if again, there's nothing. If there's nothing you can do about it, then it's just going to continually cause stress, and it's not going to do you any good. And so, how can you be at peace with what's going on? So that's just kind of a quick run through of different kinds of stress and a couple different ways to deal with those and how to manage stress. And I guess, in addition to a couple of things that I talked about exercise and, breathing exercises, some writing exercises to help decide, what can I control, and again, expectations and control that can go into your future as well. It can go into your burdens. And so all of these are really interrelated. So there's no one intervention that works, better for one. I just kind of used them as they came up with the situation. So there's a lot of different ways to approach it. And again, I think overall, the ability to listen to what's really going on is paramount in you helping students deal with stress. So I'm going to move on to the Q&A time now. So if you have any questions on this, and I think Amy's got a few questions as well, we'll open it up.
Thanks, Dan. First of all, just wow, lots of good information here, and also practical tips and ideas. And so thank you for sharing all of that. One thing, just as you're talking, that I was thinking about. And just really wondering is if you've ever held like a stress management Bible study or training for young people, or any kind of way to talk about this at a larger level with your youth and maybe also families.
I think I've talked about it. Again, this is the same kind of presentation I give to kids. I mean, I'm not giving you a whole lot of different information than I do. But I think, resource-wise, just taking some pieces from this, and that's something I would like to develop in that. I haven't quite gotten there, but, looking at how people have dealt with it. So I thought those Moses examples are great, and definitely would encourage you to use those as kind of a Bible study. But I think just kind of present. This is what I would do with a family. I would be talking about how do you define your stresses, and what are the things that you can control and can't control. And I think I've gotten some great response just from talking about this. That I think having an open forum to talk about this, giving them some information, some education. Like this. And so I think being able to put a face on what am I really stressed about, instead of just saying school, that you can talk about, well, it's really actually the burdens, or it's really these expectations I'm putting on myself. I don't know if that answered that completely, but I would say, use anything in this presentation as a helpful, if it's helpful for you. And again, those are the kinds of Bible verses I would recommend students be looking at and considering.
Great. No, yeah, that's definitely helpful. Again, if there are other questions, you can use the chat box to type them in there to answer them. We'll take just a few moments, as questions may be percolating in your head, to write them out. Otherwise, Dan, we'll move on with the remainder of the presentation. But we'll take a few moments just to give people a chance to ask a question. go ahead and keep moving on. Again, you can continue to ask a question if you'd like throughout the remainder of the presentation. But for now, let's keep moving on.
Okay. I can add a couple of other just kind of tidbits as I go through my notes. Sometimes I miss things as I'm talking about them, or I move too quickly and all of that. And so I think when it comes to expectations, that's one thing that I think that's, I don't want to say the greatest, but I think that's one that we should really consider, and also one that when you talk about how this builds with other aspects of your person, of who you are as a person. And so there's other great webinars on depression and dealing with anxiety and fear, and so kind of all the stuff works together. And so as you have these conversations with students, to be on the lookout for even some negative thinking in that. I think you can spot some signs of depression in that, in the way that kids talk about things. If you're talking about expectations for grades, and all of a sudden they start, if I don't get an A, then I failed, and so that's an example of all or nothing thinking. And so how true is that? And to really expand on that, okay, well, if you get a B, what's that going to change in your life, and really talk that out. And in some cases, they may have some real concerns about it, but in other cases, it may be just a small thing. And sometimes we, again, having these conversations breaks the cycle, because we can get into, what am I going to do on this test? I didn't have time to study for this test, and now I'm worried about what I'm going to get. If I don't get an A on the test, then I'm going to be behind in my grades. And if I get behind on my grades, then I might end up failing the class. If I fail the class, I got to take it over. I'm not going to get what I need to graduate, or I might not get the grade I want. If I can't graduate on time, or if I can't get the right grades, I'm not going to get in the right college, and I'm not going to get the right job, and I'm going to end up being, lost and homeless and broke, and I'm not going to have any family. Nobody's going to like me. You can see how stress builds on itself. And so, again, being able to talk about, how realistic the thoughts are too, and to give that perspective and be that sounding board is really valuable to these kids, because otherwise they can just be in your own head. And if you don't know how to deal with it, if you can't, deal with it as far as, exercise, stepping out of yourself, then it becomes a cycle, and it just runs through your head and continues to run and causes even more stress. So that's just a couple other things that you should consider. The last part here is, I talked earlier about stress being like a storm. And if you look at Luke 8:22-25, you have Jesus in the boat with his disciples, and Jesus is asleep. And there's a storm that's coming up. And so the disciples, even though they're fishermen and are pretty seasoned at this, they are getting concerned. And so, they're focusing on the storm. And they look out and they see the ominous skies, and they're worried about, how quick the storm's going to come and what's going to happen to them. And they see the waves start to crash up against the boat, and they can see the deterioration of the boat a little bit, and they start to get worried. And then they can hear the howl of the wind, and they can feel it, and the rain coming down harder, and they get worried. And again, their focus is entirely on their stresses. And sometimes we can be like that with our stresses. And so they come to Jesus, and I always imagine this, that when they go to wake him up, that they're holding buckets in their hand. And that they're expecting Jesus to help bail them out. They don't know what to do. Help us out, because we always think on earthly terms, and we want to solve these earthly problems that we have. And Jesus gets up and he calms the storm, and then he rebukes them for their faith and having little faith. And did you not know that the Son of Man was with you? Did you not know who I am? And I think as we deal with our stresses, we don't always consider who's in the boat with us. They didn't think about it. They were focused on their stresses. They were focused on their problems. They were focused on all the things that were going wrong. And they didn't realize that the Son of God is literally in the boat with them. And what could really happen to them, that God cannot handle. And so that's a question that, as we deal with stress, no matter, I gave you some very, in some cases, earthly ways to deal with stress and some interventions, but the reality is we as Christians have something that is special and unique in dealing with stress because we know the future. We know the promises of our God, and we know we have a God that keeps those promises. And so no matter what is happening in our lives, there's nothing that can separate us from Him. We always have Jesus Christ in the boat with us. So just always remember that.
Your words of encouragement, that's something I know I need to hear, and I think all of us, regardless of whether we're a teen or not, just remember who's in the boat with us and where our source of strength and peace come from. So thank you for the information you shared. Here is Dan's contact information once again. If you want to reach out, have additional questions, or want to follow up on some of the ideas or talking points that he presented today, feel free to reach out to him, as well as our office, youth.ministry@lcms.org. And our next webinar next month on June 21st, again at noon Central, we'll be joined with Grant Carey, DC at Concordia, Texas. He'll be speaking on the topic Porn to Love, ministering to teens dealing with the lure of pornography. Another very important topic for us to be discussing. Between now and then, may God continue to bless you and your ministry. We thank you so much for the ways that you care for young people in your communities. And may the peace of Christ that Dan talked about be with you regardless of your situation. Dan, thank you. Thank you so much for leading us today and for your time between classes.
Thank you for having me.